Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Changemaker Speaker Series brought to you by the Leeds School of Business at the University of Colorado in beautiful Boulder. Today, we are honored to have Anna Walker, the Vice President of Public Affairs at Levi Strauss & Co. as our featured Changemaker. My name, for those of you who don't know me, is Catherine Wendell, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Ethics and Social Responsibility at Leeds. Our center's mission is to empower current and future business leaders to drive solutions to environmental, social, and ethical challenges. And here's to you, Boulder. We like to start our events with a land acknowledgement. As we gather, we honor and acknowledge that the University of Colorado's 4 campuses are on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, Apache, Comanche, Kiowa, Lakota, Pueblo, and Shoshone nations. And further, we acknowledge the 48 contemporary tribal nations historically tied to the lands that comprise what is now called Colorado. And now it is time to get to know our featured changemaker, Anna Walker. Anna is the VP of Public Affairs at Levi Strauss, which, as we all know, is one of the world's largest brand name apparel companies and a global leader in jeanswear. Anna also leads Levi Strauss's Community Affairs program. And in this role, she develops the strategy for community grants, employee giving, and volunteerism programs globally. Anna is the chair of the board of the U.S. Fashion Industry Association and is a member of the Levi Strauss Foundation board. And on a personal note, I should mention that I interned for Anna at Levi Strauss in 2009 when I was in business school at UC Berkeley. And at the time, the financial markets were crashing. It was 2009. The job market was terrible. And I was and continue to be so grateful to Anna for offering me my dream sustainability internship at Levi Strauss in the midst of so much turmoil. And it was a really special experience. I learned a lot from Anna about sustainability and public affairs. And Levi Strauss is a special place to work. For those of you who aren't aware, it's located right in downtown San Francisco, right on the water, beautiful location. But it's a special company because of its values-based leadership, which we'll talk more about soon. So Anna, we're so excited to have you as our featured changemaker today. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. I can't believe it was 2009. It doesn't seem like it could possibly be that long ago.
It flew by.
Yeah, really.
Well, great. Well, Anna, I'd like to start out by asking you to tell us more about your background prior to joining Levi Strauss 18 years ago. How did your experiences early on in life shape your career path? And how did you become interested in corporate social responsibility so long ago?
Yeah, well, I joined Levi's 18 years ago. I moved back from the East Coast with my eldest son, babe in arms. And in my 18 years, I've watched him grow up, and he's just starting college now. And what brought me to Levi's really was that values-based leadership. I had been in my undergraduate and graduate school focused on development economics and how countries develop and move up the economic development chain. And the apparel industry is frequently the first thing a country will do as it moves from subsistence agriculture into labor-intensive manufacturing and job creation and exports. And so joining the apparel industry made total sense with what my background had been and my focus had been. And I had quite honestly thought that I was going to be working for a UN development agency up until I got more exposure to the business community.
Okay.
So I had interned with the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. I worked very closely with the UN body, the International Labor Organization, and really quickly realized that to have greater impact, I could, should be in the business community, that those are great organizations, but they move slow and have a lot of bureaucracy. And so to have greater impact, business made a lot of sense, and particularly the apparel industry. So because I had focused on Latin America and Africa and undergraduate and graduate programs, and so there was a really nice intersection with that work. And Levi's in particular, when they had been, it's a 169-year-old company. And so our supply chain had initially really been all owned, had been all in the US. And when that transition came for the whole of the apparel industry, that most apparel is sourced from around the world, they had their employees ask leadership, how is it going to be when we go from this owned supply chain to contract manufacturing globally? How are we going to make sure that the conditions under which our products are made are the same as when we made it here, and how we took care of our people? And so that was really established very early on, that conversation about taking care of the supply chain and values-led leadership. So that also, made it really attractive to come over to Levi's.
Fantastic. And as we mentioned, you've been working at Levi Strauss since 2004. You started as a senior manager of government affairs and public policy, and now you are the VP of public affairs. Can you tell us about your experience working your way up the ladder? Did you get all the promotions that you wanted, all the opportunities? What was it like?
Yeah. Well, I kind of laugh because I wouldn't say we have much of a ladder at Levi's, because we're a pretty small and flat organization. And that's part of what's kept me there, is I've had great exposure to the whole of the business, to learn beyond the world the work that my team contributes, to work across the organization and to work with senior management. So there's, we're a fairly flat, we're a fairly collaborative style business, and we have lots of opportunity to learn across the organization. So that's really what's kept me there, year in and year out, the change. But what I'm exposed to has been different and inspiring and exciting. I would say that, early on in my days at Levi's, when I was a senior manager, that was a lot of work that was I could go very deep on things. And that was, at the time, that's exactly what I enjoyed and what I could contribute, was really becoming a deep subject matter expert and advising the organization on issues and topics. And then, now in a VP role, what I'm really enjoying is working with the whole of the team and inspiring them and engaging with them and helping them develop and figure out what's next, and be those advisors, those deep subject matter experts. So my work now at Levi's as the head of public affairs includes our government relations work, our stakeholder engagement, the community affairs work, which is both corporate grant making, as well as our employee giving and volunteerism programs. And then I also manage our values and sustainability communications and CEO communications functions.
Great. I would like to dive a little bit deeper into your role. And when I was reading through your bio, it struck me that you describe your current role using the following words. You say, I support Levi Strauss's business strategy and strengthen the company's reputation by anticipating and shaping external public policy and stakeholder initiatives. And so could you describe what does that mean in practical terms? What does it mean to anticipate and shape external public policy and stakeholder initiatives?
Yeah, so it's most, the fun part of the work is they count on us to look around corners, to really have those external relationships for the organization within our industry, across industry, with nonprofit organizations, media relations, to kind of see what's coming. What are the changing expectations of business and changing expectations specifically of Levi's? And within that, advise, this is what's coming here. If we want to get ahead, this is what we need to do internally. If we don't see this as advantageous or the direction we want to take, we do need to be working on the policy landscape to make sure it does suit the way our business is structured. So an example of that is paid family leave. My team early on really identified that was going to be an up and coming issue, and that there's a huge advantage internally, especially with employees, get ahead and to have a robust policy in place. And that was also what was happening in the policy landscape. If it wasn't going to happen at the federal level, we were certainly seeing developments at the state level. And to some degree, being here in San Francisco at the very local city level, that the policy was changing, and that we could mitigate that sort of whack-a-mole of diverse policy by having our own robust policy, but also would help build reputation, build credibility with employees, and also in Washington as we advocate, build a lot of relationships there to be aligned with the efforts on public to form, federal level public policy on paid family leave. So that was an example of really needing participating, and then we're going on to shape policy, because we spent last year doing a lot. Our CEO wrote an op-ed. He did a lot of speaking and supported the White House on the paid leave components of Build Back Better, and contributed there, that would help both foster relationships. We didn't in the end, as you all know, get paid family leave in the Build Back Better bill, but it was a good year of building relationships, setting the table for what's to come.
And how challenging is it to build the business case internally for something like paid family leave? Does everyone at Levi Strauss just get it immediately, or do you really have to do a lot of work internally to build a business rationale for something like that?
We do have to do the work. And that's really was working at the time with our finance team on the cost implications, with our legal team on the legal implications, and with our HR team on where they were at and where they were willing to go. And it's not only, I think that the lens we apply is we're a global company. We're headquartered in the United States, and 50% of our business is here, the lion's share of our employee base, but we are a global company in 110 countries around the world. So another thing we needed to stare down was, what does this mean, and what does paid leave look like elsewhere, and for all of our employees? And so all of those conversations needed to happen. I wouldn't say it was a huge heavy lift, but really did need to do the thorough due diligence, both on what is the policy landscape and the stakeholder expectations. What is the industry doing? What are other industries doing? Because definitely the tech and consulting and legal were way ahead of the consumer products, which we usually benchmark against. So doing all of that homework. We have a CEO and a leadership team that are very much data and facts based as they make decisions. So as much as that robust background you can provide, and then making sure that you've got your other internal business partners lined up was really important. But it wasn't in the end a heavy lift to get it over the finish line. And I think it's work that now across the organization, particularly proud of. And just the other day, I was talking to somebody, and he was saying, it's huge that I can go take this time off with my new baby and foster that relationship. And hearing those anecdotes across the way make me very proud of the work we did internally. And I'm hopeful that the external landscape will evolve as well.
That's fantastic. And are other apparel companies doing the same thing? Why or why not?
Well, Patagonia has a really impressive program. They have long had that in place. And that really goes back to their founders, that was key to how they wanted to organize. So I would say they're within our industry, they are leaders in this space, generally on childcare and benefits for work-life balance. They are really there. Nike as well has done a lot, but I think there's a lot of work to do, particularly in the apparel industry, but across consumer products companies. In this space, it's still a very small percentage of the US population that has employer-supported paid leave programs. So for now, well, the federal policy probably isn't going to happen for a while. I think that's the conversations that needs to happen, is why it's in our interest as employers to provide full circle work-life balance programs to support our people and retain and attract the best talent.
Right. And I'm curious, have you ever had to advocate for a policy that you personally didn't believe in? And if so, how did you manage that internal conflict?
It's interesting. I saw that, when you shared the questions, I've been thinking on it. And I think I'm mostly fortunate in that I haven't faced that a lot. I think where it may have come up is here in San Francisco at the local level, there's just a lot of taxing in the business community. And a lot of it is utterly well-intentioned, but not thoroughly thought up as far as like how different companies are structured and what it means for them. And will we be driving, will the city be driving businesses out just because it becomes too costly? And there was an effort around a tax on business for supporting the homeless, which is a terrible problem here in the Bay Area, and absolutely needs attention. And so really well intentioned, but not thoroughly thought out. And really at the time that it was being put together, it was kind of collecting the funding without a clear sense of strategy or how it was going to be spent. So I mentioned this just in that it wasn't one where I really struggled with having to advocate on something I didn't believe in, but I struggled with, I understood their intent. And I knew reputationally, it's really hard to come out against an effort, a well-intentioned effort that may not be thoroughly thought through. So that was really our challenge at the time, was how do we position and talk about this when there's definitely a problem, and that business can be part of the solution, but the way they've crafted this probably is, could be hurtful to our business and our longevity in the city.
Sure, that makes sense. Okay, well, I visited Levi Strauss's website last week, and under the Who We Are section, it has a great statement that says, "We are ... fueled by our strong values, creativity, and hard work." And it struck me because we talk a lot about the importance of values-driven leadership here at the Leeds School of Business. And I'm curious if you could update us a bit on the values at Levi Strauss, and how does values leadership influence the culture and decisions that are made?
Yeah, I think we have an interesting story on this. So our stated values as a company are empathy, originality, integrity, and courage. But really this values-based leadership of the company goes all the way back to Levi Strauss and Company, 169 years to when we were founded. And he very much led the organization based on the Judeo values in which he was raised. And that, is the value of giving back to community. And so across his leadership early on, you saw that giving back, in that he made an early donation to an orphanage in San Francisco after the 1906 earthquake, kept people employed, even though they couldn't be manufacturing, helping to rebuild our facilities. Like this sense of community and commitment has permeated through. And we're now, we're publicly traded now, but we're still majority owned by the descendants of Levi Strauss. And I've been here 18 years. And so that my early days, we were still privately held, and that influence of the family and that focus on values kind of has permeated all the way through. So we integrated our factories in the South before it was required by law. We recognized the HIV/AIDS pandemic before it had a name and started to engage our employees on it, or very early on. We supported marriage equality when we were the only company out there doing so. And now when we sign on at anything related to LGBT equality, we've got 300 companies joining us. But that, sense of this is just the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for our people, it's for our communities, has been the way we've operated for a very long time. And now we've had a CEO, Chip Berg, who's been with us 10 years, and he talks a lot, about choosing the harder right over the easier wrong, which I think dovetails very much with, that sense of values and purpose, and that he applies that to much of the tough conversations that we have, and believes that we should be leading through a profits through principles approach to business, that keeps that front and center for his leadership team and the organization.
I like that, choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. That's good. I haven't heard that before. Well, I'm glad you brought up giving back to the community, because I did want to probe a bit deeper into that. You manage the community affairs program, which includes a lot of community grants, which you talked about a bit, also encourages employee giving and volunteerism programs globally. So can you tell us a bit more about these efforts? Like what other types of community grants does Levi Strauss give? Is it through the foundation or other efforts? And why does the company believe this is important, along with employee giving and volunteerism?
Yeah, so we have the Levi Strauss Foundation, which is a separate organization within the company. And their grant making is in the areas of social justice, worker rights, and HIV and AIDS. And their grants and their giving is really structured on, social impact and like looking at how we're supporting these communities. The community affairs grants that I fund, because they are within the company, can be more targeted to supporting the company's objectives. So the primary objective of most of the community grant making is really reputation building for the company itself. And so the grant making also fits with the public policy advocacy priorities of the organization. So we have a big chunk of community affairs grants that are around voting, access to voting, getting out the vote. We have a piece of grant making around environmental justice that supports the broader sustainability objectives of the organization, and particularly fostering and supporting communities working on environmental, the intersection of social justice and environmental sustainability. We have a lot of grants that are around equality and the issues that we have advocated on as a company. So particularly LGBTQ equality, but also immigration and refugees, which is a big issue for our teams in Europe and elsewhere in the world. And then part of that community affairs work is not only the grant making on behalf of the company, but also that inspiring our employees to give and to volunteer. And so we have funding to support them to do so. And so if you're a Levi's employee, you get 5 hours a month off to volunteer, and that 5 hours can be matched with a grant from the company. Also, if you donate dollars, those can be supported by the company. And we've really been working over these last years to expand participation from employees globally, particularly on the giving side. There was a lot of barriers to that matching program, and the team has been working hard to lift that and get employees giving back across the world. And it's been really inspiring and exciting to see sort of how people engage and what they're interested in, and the groups that they're bringing in for us to get to know through their giving and their volunteering.
Right. And today people seem busier than ever. And so how do you compel them to participate in volunteerism programs? You talked a bit about that, but can you tell us more about that?
Part of it's making it easy. So we offer a lot of programs that just people can easily opt into. They can build a volunteer activity. They can do it in their own community where they're at. So you can do it individually with your local Girl Scouts or food bank, or you can organize with your team, and we'll support you in doing that. And that's been a great, not only the benefit of getting people out and volunteering and giving back, but also team building within the organization. Spending that time together doing something that's not necessarily work related, and the conversations and the bonding that happens pays benefits down the road. And we recently, we're a little late to the game, started on employee resource groups. So I think we're maybe 3 or 4 years in now on employee resource groups, and those have also been a way that where people have an issue specific focus to provide them with giving and volunteer opportunities. And they have been some of our greatest champions for urging their peers and partners in the organization to engage and support. And we often, structure some of those around the issues that we are working on as a company. So very recently, our women's resource group did letter signing to new, just people who turned 18 and can now register to vote, kind of reminding them of that opportunity. So we'll do some of that where it's really aligned with the overall strategy of the organization.
That makes a lot of sense. Great. And Levi Strauss has always been deemed a leader in corporate social responsibility and sustainability within the apparel industry, but even beyond. And can you tell us something about what the company is doing today that makes you especially proud?
Yeah, we have a relatively new head of Chief Sustainability Officer. And I think the thing that he is constantly now pushing us on is authenticity. So everybody's out there making big proclamations about what they're going to do. Let's not just say things that we haven't designed the plan and we don't know how we're going to get there. Keep it authentic, keep it true. And he's also really been pushing us on transparency and traceability. And he's getting us out there. So we issued our first sustainability report just last year, and he's bringing new lenses to what we should be sharing, what audiences we should be prioritizing, and what data information they need to know from us, which fits. We're late to the game. Part of that is being privately held and not having had the same motivators to do it in the past that others have. But we're also at a moment where ESG conversations and what you're sharing and reporting is front and center. So really excited about his leadership and those two things that he brings to us. But also the brand is out there like they haven't been before. So they have a campaign called Buy Better, Wear Longer, which I think is a very brave conversation with the consumer. You don't see a lot of companies saying, maybe slow down and buy a beautiful product you're going to keep forever for the long term. And that's really what that campaign is focused on, is more thoughtful consumption, and really looking to buy a better, beautiful product that's well made and you're going to keep in love for the long term. There's a lot of disposability right now in the apparel industry, and so pivoting that conversation, because the consumer usually leads us into new territory rather than us leading them. But it was very exciting to see the Levi's brands lead and initiate that conversation with the consumer. And so that launched last year, and then we'll have a refresh of the campaign in a few months. But that's led to a lot of good relationships for the organization and pushed us to do more.
That's great. And I can see how that campaign would resonate with Gen Z consumers in particular. That makes a lot of sense. Well, great. Well, we're at a unique moment in time, given the pandemic, the global racial reckoning, climate challenges, and more. And so I'm wondering, what big changes do you think we'll see in companies like Levi Strauss over the next decade or two? What's coming?
Yeah, hard to say for the next decade because we have such a dynamic world we're living in.
Yeah.
But I think the themes that will continue is the centrality of the employee. I think the pandemic made that so. Like, we all really just very quickly focused on how do we take care of our people, how do we support them. There's just a tremendous change. We have the great resignation happening, and so the importance of the employee voice and taking care of your people and listening to them, I think will continue to be central in a way that it wasn't before. I think I've been thinking a lot on this conversation of, is globalization over? And what does that mean for how businesses are structured? If we're moving to more local or near sourcing and building our businesses so that we're sourcing in country or near market, and what does that mean if for especially a global brand that is really proudly global and relies on international trade and the investment and all of that. So what's that pivot going to mean? And then the last thing I mentioned is, I think the change is going to happen with the consumer. And are they going to be demanding a better product, nicely made, potentially pay at a higher price point, and reward those companies that are moving back from sort of disposable and quick and fast to really, beautiful long-term products that they keep. And what does that mean for our business model over the long term? So I don't know that that's in the next 2 decades, but those are some of the things I think on.
The world's spinning quickly. Yes. Well, great. Well, and what advice do you have for current and future business leaders in the room?
Remain open-minded. Like, the path isn't always straight and linear. And I've recently had people ask me, like, do I need to have this degree, or does it need to be from here, and do I have to have this experience? And when I look at the teams that I've recruited or the people that I work with, it's people come from all walks of life. So I think that open-mindedness, and I think that right now in particular, resiliency. So showing, demonstrating the hard work and the bounce back is really, something that people are hiring for right now and looking at as they find the right next talent, because we have a very dynamic world right now where with the pandemic, with war in Europe for the first time in a very long time. We're looking for people who have the resiliency to bounce back and to bring that sort of creativity that you mentioned, this you find on our website, to how we operate.
Mm-hmm. And is there anything else you'd like to share before we transition to Q&A?
I don't know. I'm interested to hear sort of what this group is we're thinking about and working on, and I really believe in sort of collaboration and looking outside the four walls of your organization to learn. So look forward to the conversation.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for the insightful conversation. It's been a privilege to talk to you. And at this time, I'd like to transition to open discussion. So if you have a question for Anna, please plug it into the chat. And Julie, I will hand it over to you to facilitate the questions.
Thank you. Well, what a fascinating conversation. We have lots of activity in the chat and lots of excited folks who have questions. So Anna, the first one is, what advice do you have for people who are wanting to go into the fashion or apparel industry specifically?
Sorry, I've got ambient noise around me, so I don't know if you guys can hear it. For the fashion industry, it depends on what you want to do. I think that if you do want to design, be on the creative side, you know, that following that path of really understanding design innovation with one of a design school or working within our industry, you know, we look for that experience specific to talent within the industry. But if it's, you know, another function, finance, legal, corporate affairs, commercial operations, I think we really look for, it doesn't have to necessarily be within the fashion industry that you come to us. Looking for the experience and knowledge of the expertise in whatever space that is. Other consumer products, it can be from tech, other places that will search for that talent.
Great, thank you. The next one is addressing the thoughtful consumption initiative, the buy better, wear longer that you were just talking about, which is exciting. As you mentioned, there can be a lot of waste, a lot of fast fashion within the fashion industry, and there's some negative publicity, I think, that companies are getting as more and more people are aware. We have an audience member who asked if Levi's has a program end of life for kind of recuperating old used clothing that has reached the end of its cycle.
Yeah, we've had a couple. Right now we have the secondhand program. Where we actually encourage consumers to sell back to us their products, and they can then also purchase, you know, refurbished Levi's apparel. We are unique. I think we're in there with the luxury brands in that our used apparel is coveted. So people will go to the secondhand stores looking for Levi's. So we have that piece. That doesn't close the loop. It isn't completely circular. So we have other initiatives we're working on with reclaimed products, actually turning them back into fabrics and putting them back into the chase. So we have a program called Well Thread that's led by one of our innovation leads, Paul Dillinger, and he's working with a couple different firms to look out how do we do product take back and then converting that into fabrics, either on its own or mixed with virgin cotton. So we have those. We have a lot of work to do in this space, but they're definitely working on how we do that. And it's taking, like I said, several routes. Some is the secondhand and the buyback, and some of it is how do we create a product that's less impactful and is reusing what is out there in the apparel industry.
That's great to hear that you're looking at just multi-pronged approach to address a really large issue. So you mentioned in your comments that your team is often the first to spot trends that are coming. We have an audience member who asks, how else does your team inform business strategy?
So we sit within the of several functions of the company. So I dually sit both within the corporate affairs team, but also the operations team, advising them on trade compliance, and supply chain strategy related work. But we also, work hand in glove and advise both on the finance team and with the legal team, providing that, and the commercial operations. So we'll duly report, and members of my team will work with them, particularly to advise on the brand's marketing and PR related work to keep it authentic, and to help support them to find the right partners on the various campaigns that they have.
Great. This sort of has been addressed already, but just in case you have anything else to add, there's a question: do you think that fast fashion is here to stay? And is there a way that fast fashion can be sustainable? Like, is that just a contradiction in terms, or do you think there are ways that this trend can get better while remaining fast fashion?
Yeah, is it here to stay? I think it has to do with how democratic we can be on really beautiful, well-made, durable product. I think that if that can come to a price point that is attractive, I'd like to think that the consumer is moving more. I mean, I know my nieces are doing more and more thrifting. I think the intent is there, like how fast we move. But I think part of what we'll get there is that some of the fast fashion is really accessible to a broad range of consumers so will they stop buying in large volumes? That's the question. But I think also it's making a really well-made product, democratic and accessible across all incomes will help on that. And I do think on the, if it stays the way it is, it does have to become more circular. So it does have to be that they close the loop and they bring it back in, and they find ways to convert what's already been made back into a new beautiful product.
Absolutely. Kind of pivoting to your own journey again, is there a pivotal experience that you gained prior to your current role that has made you able to be successful in this role that you're in now?
Yeah, I guess it was back in 2012, we had a Greenpeace campaign come our way called the Greenpeace Detox campaign. And that was a really pivotal moment for me, in that I was called on both to provide sort of the SME expertise on chemicals in the supply chain, and then the advice on how to work with Greenpeace to address what they're bringing to us. And I ended up negotiating with Greenpeace our LS&Co detox commitment. And that was a pivotal moment for me, in that really I established both internally and externally my leadership ability and my ability to negotiate and build relationships in the interest of the organization. And it was also a moment where I kind of made that shift from being like a subject matter expert to more of a, a leader, manager, and supporting others. And I, learned a lot through the process. And I also learned a lot about like letting go and stepping up as a result of it.
That sounds like a fascinating experience. And Greenpeace is they don't pull their punches. So that's quite the organization to be learning with. That's great.
They don't pull their punches, but I would say they are very fair. Or at least in our case, they were very fair, and they were willing to, they saw that. I think there's some organizations that it is about sort of getting the headline and the flashy, and I think Greenpeace gets why that's important to do, but they also want to get to a solution, and they want to see the change that they're advocating for, not just sort of continued headlines.
Absolutely. I have a question around how you are measuring your CSR success and what types of reports you share out with your stakeholders. You said you did your first sustainability report recently, and I could imagine that with different groups you might report on different things as well.
Yeah, I mean, the sustainability report is the most kind of comprehensive. report, and that it does include like the work that my team does, but also like our DE&I work is reported in there. But then we do have a cutout. So last week we released our DE&I impact report that goes deeper than you'd find in our sustainability. And that is meant, like you said, to sort of target and communicate to a broader audience. And I think for the DE&I report, the most important audience is employees. And when I saw it, I said to the team that put together, and I hope all of our team, spends time with this, that it's great that it gets out there and we're transparent and we're communicating on this. But the most important audience that can give us feedback and help us to move is our own team.
Absolutely. And how are you measuring success and how you're doing?
Yeah, I think there's a general sentiment that we've been too quiet, on what we've done on corporate citizenship and sustainability. There was a real humility. I think we're doing more and more. I mean, I think if you see it in the marketing, if we're doing buy better, wear longer, we're putting a bit of a megaphone to what we're doing. And I think one of the measures that we're really proud of is that the Fortune Change the World list that we've been on it several years, and that last year they recognized that Buy Better Wear Longer campaign and the paid leave work that we mentioned earlier, and that external validation, that work we're really proud of and that we're trying to communicate out to a broader audience is getting heard and recognized, is one example of sort of that measure beyond our own navel gazing, that gives us the validation that we should keep going and seek to do more.
Absolutely. Okay, this may be the last one because we're getting close to time. A lot has changed in the time that you've been at Levi's. Over the years, what has been your favorite part of this field within CSR or ESG?
I like the collaboration, particularly within the industry. I mean, if the apparel industry and a lot of the supply chain sustainability issues, we're in a shared space. Nothing's gained from trying to have first mover advantage or go it alone. And so, like, just to give you some context, an apparel supply chain, when you source from a factory, you're very unlikely to be the exclusive brand in there. They're going to have Levi's and Gap and H&M. And so we benefit really from collaborating, from sharing information, from building common cause and communicating with that supply chain with a single set of expectations and investments. And so I think there's some other industries that are like that. I think to some degree, electronics also shares that. And they've actually learned a lot from us for when we did first go out alone and build our own codes of conduct and see it as a competitive advantage. And I think that one of the things I really enjoy now is that information sharing, that collaboration, and that working together. It's a lot to be learned.
That's wonderful. One very quick last question. If students would like to follow up with you, we have quite a few more questions in the chat that I didn't get to ask. Would you be open to that? And what would be an appropriate way for them to do that?
Certainly, and by email would be great.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks. And and thanks to everyone for joining. I think it's been a really interesting, inspiring conversation as well. And Anna, we know you're based in the Bay Area, but please come and visit Boulder at some point and let us know. And we'd love to continue the conversation in person here. So thank you so much for your time. And we'll let you know when the video is available for viewing.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. Nice talking with you all.
Thanks for being a change maker.